Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Spiny Dogfish Management Board. My name is Pat Gear. I am the administrative proxy for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And to my left is Chris Baker. He's from Massachusetts. He's the law enforcement representative, law enforcement committee representative. And to my right is James Boyle, who is our fisheries management plan development person. First order of business today is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes, modifications, or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved by consent. Approval of the proceedings from the August 2024 meeting. Are there any changes to the minutes, to proceedings, additions, edits, anything? Hearing none, they're approved by consent. Next is public comment. Has anybody signed up for public comment for items that are not on the agenda today? Okay, we have one person online, Mr. Fletcher.
I would like to bring the council or the commission a problem of the machinery needed to cut small dogfish and the lack of funding to do the research to do it. It was built by MIT in the 80s. And if there's anybody on the commission that would have any thought process to help, either Rob Vince at MIT or Jason Didden with Mid-Atlantic Council could use any help to do that. And with the sturgeon situation wanting smaller fish, this equipment is definitely needed. Thank you for your time. James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher, for your comments. Is there anybody else who wants to comment? Anybody else online? Not seeing anybody in the room. Let's move on to item number 4. I'll just consider the approval of draft addendum 7 for the public comment on the Atlantic sturgeon bycatch reduction measures. This has already gone through the Mid-Atlantic Council and the New England Fisheries Management Council, and this is just a coming up developing equivalent overnight soak restrictions. So I'll turn it over to James at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We can jump right in. Go to the next slide. So here's the process to this point. The board initiated the development of draft addendum 7 at the August meeting, and the goal for today is to approve the document for public comment. After a public comment period and hearings from November till January, the board would then consider final approval at the winter meeting in February. As a quick reminder of the background, in August, NOAA Fisheries published a proposed rule that corresponds to recommendations from the Mid-Atlantic and New England Fishery Management Councils to implement overnight soak prohibitions for certain gillnet mesh sizes in specific times and areas to reduce sturgeon bycatch. The areas include both federal and state waters, and one objective of the Spiny Dogfish FMP is to strive for complementary management, which led to the initiation of this addendum to implement corresponding measures for harvesters that do not have a federal permit and only fish in state waters. Based on the requirements of the 2021 biological opinion that began the federal process, the final rule and 30-day implementation period for federal action is expected before the end of 2024. The proposed rule would establish a prohibition on overnight soaks, which is defined as from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. within 3 polygons, as shown in the figures on the slide, for federal spiny dogfish permit holders specifically. The New Jersey area is shown in purple, and the blue polygons from north to south are the Delaware and Maryland area and the Virginia area, respectively. The PDT in the addendum maintain this naming convention for consistency, but wants to make a note that the Delaware and Maryland area is adjacent to, but does not overlap with Delaware state waters, and so Delaware is not included in the discussion of the actions. In the New Jersey area, the prohibition would be for the months of May and November for mesh sizes between 5 and 10 inches, and in the Delaware and Maryland and the Virginia areas, it would last from November through March for mesh sizes between 5.25 and 10 inches. So here's a breakdown of how each of the affected states permit for dogfish. New Jersey issues licenses by year and has a general permit or a gillnet permit for drift, anchored, and staked gillnets. Maryland has a tiered system where different permits are allowed to harvest spiny dogfish at different trip limits. So a general finfish license permits harvest of 1,000 pounds of spiny dogfish. If the harvester also has a striped bass permit, then they can take 2,500 pounds of spiny dogfish, and a spiny dogfish specific permit holder can harvest a maximum of 10,000 pounds. Virginia issues permits by species and has a spiny dogfish specific permit. So there are three options in the proposed management program of the addendum. Option one is the status quo, where spiny dogfish harvesters that do not have a federal permit and fish only in state waters may continue to soak gill nets of the specified mesh sizes overnight in the state waters portions of the bycatch reduction areas. Option two would apply complementary overnight soaks to species-specific state spiny dogfish permit holders. So this option is consistent with the proposed rule from federal action in that it applies the new measures to spiny dogfish specific permits. However, due to Maryland's tiered permit system, there are striped bass and finfish permit holders that do not also possess a spiny dogfish state permit may continue to harvest spiny dogfish at reduced trip limits within the Maryland state waters portion of the Maryland and Delaware bycatch reduction area. In Jersey, they would not have to take any action because they do not issue species-specific permits for spiny dogfish. However, they do already require any person or vessel that possesses for sale or attempts to sell spiny dogfish to possess a federal permit. And if they have a federal permit, they would be already captured by the federal action. Option three would prohibit all spiny dogfish harvest via overnight soaks for the specified mesh sizes, times, and areas, regardless of permit. This option is distinct from option two in that it would not result in any allowances for spiny dogfish to be harvested in the state waters portions of the bycatch reduction areas. That is inconsistent with the federal rules, but presents some greater enforcement challenges because of the language. In conversations with the law enforcement committee I had yesterday, they recommended just one change to the document to confirm that while option three eliminates directed harvest that would otherwise be permitted under option two, it does present additional enforcement challenges. So the board action to consider today is to approve the addendum for public comment as modified today if the board wishes to include the edit from the LEC or make any additional modifications. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Thank you, James. Are there any questions for James at this time? Megan?
Yeah, thanks. I just had a question of the difference between options 2 and 3. It sounds like in option 2, no overnight soak for those specific spiny dogfish permit holders. So they're taking their nets out of the water. Option 3, it doesn't sound like those nets are coming out of the water. It's just no harvest from nets that are still in the water. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is something that came up at law enforcement yesterday as well. It seems more of an incentive structure that because they cannot possess or harvest spiny dogfish. If they are spiny dogfish directed harvesters, then theoretically they wouldn't put the nets in the areas at the times because they couldn't keep that catch. If you are not a spiny dogfish directed harvester, then you could cull that catch, for example.
Okay. I would be curious if that meets what the objectives were in the buy-up. I understand it was just for federal permit holders, but I guess I have some questions about that, but that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Any other questions for James? Tony?
Pat, I think for just to Megan's question, I think the intention is for the state to then implement regulations that would force that, but we're not telling you all in the document how to write those regulations.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Any other comments or discussion? All right, I'm not hearing any of that, so I guess we're looking for a motion. Mr. Luisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve draft addendum 7 for public comment as amended today.
And we have a second by John Clark. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, I'll read the motion in. Move to approve draft addendum 7 for public comment as amended today. Motion by Mr. Luisi, seconded by Mr. Clark. Is there any objection to this motion? Seeing none, motion is accepted. All right. That was quick. Okay. Moving on to item number 5 is to consider revising 2024-25 fishing year quota. We may have to take a possible action on this, and James has we received a letter from James, I think it was on October 7th, describing what the concerns are with bycatch overages from last year. And so James has a quick presentation on that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we can jump right into this one as well. So in response to an emergency rule by NOAA Fisheries, as you all recall, the board approved a state quota for the current 2024-2025 fishing year of 11,331,747 pounds. After the emergency rule was published, NOAA Fisheries finalized the 2023 and 2024 catch data, including landings and discards. This data revealed estimated discards were higher than what was anticipated and resulted in an overage of 1,082,487 pounds of the ACL. In September, NOAA Fisheries extended the emergency rule for the remainder of the fishing year, and through that rule, applied the payback of the overage by deducting the overage amount from the current 2024-2025 quota. This action results in a new federal quota of 10,249,260 pounds. Please note this is slightly different than the preliminary estimate provided in the memo in meeting materials, but this is the final number from the proposed rule, or from the final rule, excuse me. From preliminary landings estimates, every state and jurisdiction is able to utilize the maximum of the 5% rollover provision. Only New York and New Jersey did not express interest in rolling over quota from last year. If the other states and jurisdictions still choose to utilize the rollover provision, there's an additional 538,467 pounds added to the state coastwide quota. If the board does not adjust the quota to match the federal quota, then including that rollover, the difference between the state quota and federal quota is potentially 1,620,954 pounds. If the board does adjust and still to the federal quota, but still uses the rollover provision, then the difference between the federal and state quotas will be the amount of the rollover, that 538,000 pounds. So the possible implications of this, if the state coastwide quota is greater than the federal quota, there is the possibility that if landings are projected to exceed the federal quota, then federal waters will be closed and current federal permit holders will not be able to land dogfish, while harvesters with only state permits in state waters may continue to harvest. Additionally, this would create an incentive for harvesters to drop their federal permits once federal waters are closed for the remainder of the fishing year and reacquire them at the beginning of the following fishing year. In that case, any overage of the federal ACL would be deducted from a future fishing year. So the board action for consideration today is to revise the 2024-2025 coastwide quota to 10,249,260 pounds to match the federal quota. Since this action would be revising a final action that the board took, it would require a 2/3 majority of the board. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, James. Are there any questions for James? Eric Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you said that the overage would be deducted from a future year. How is it, the next year, or is it pick a year and a year?
So I believe the language that, and I can, if Allie has any additional thoughts, but I believe the language is that it's as soon as possible or something to that effect. And so it's not definitive, it's the next year or following year.
I had the same question, Eric. Mike Luisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. James, on the slide that you presented, the implication slide, I think what you're referencing in that implication slide is what we have talked about for years, which is when there's a discrepancy, when there's a difference between the federal and state quotas, and the state quotas are higher than the federal quotas, that we could find ourselves in a constant loop of over harvesting based on federal rules that continually just whittle away at whatever that federal quota is, because the states will, if we continue to harvest more than the federal limits, then the federal quota eventually just over time disappears. It just goes away because of the over harvest. And that's a situation, excuse me, that I know we have had discussions around this table, not just for spiny dogfish, but for other species, that we really, our intention is to try to maintain consistency between the states and the federal water. So does your final, the slide you presented at the end where, you know, the possible action that we need to take today, my question directly is, if we were to consider revising to the 10,249,260 number, does that puts us back in line with the federal quota, so that are we pulling ourselves out of that loop that we are right now in? Does it assist with that, tightening the difference between the two quotas? I know that it's a long way of asking a simple question, but I'm still catching up from a late night last night.
It does make the difference smaller if the states use the rollover provision. So if the states do not choose to roll, if no state chooses to roll over, then changing it to this number would make it exactly the same. If the board changes it to this number and the states roll over, then the difference is either that 538,000 number, or if New York and New Jersey change their minds, it would be that 600,000 number that was on the previous slide.
Okay. With that, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, you said there were motions prepared. I'd be willing to make that motion to close the gap to the degree that we can today. Whenever you're ready for that. I know the others might have questions.
Well, I saw a couple other hands. I saw John's hand go up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just curious again, because if I recall, this issue kind of developed because the only processor of Dogfish said he needs a certain minimum amount of product to make it worthwhile. Would this new quota meet the minimums required?
I'm not sure what that minimum is right now, but Ray, Kane?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe you're talking about sea trade, John, and they're requiring 10 million pounds. They say they can't operate with less than that. Thank you.
So in a sense, even doing the new federal amount would meet that. Yeah. Are there any other? Adam Nowalski?
Thanks. I apologize if I missed this, but we're proposing 10,249, 360 today, which is a different number than what was in the memo. What was the reason for that change today?
There was just there was less than 2,000 pound difference between the Excel sheet I was working off of and the final rule that came out in the Federal Register. That was just the difference. There was a 10,251 in the memo and this 10,249 and change in the final number.
Okay, are there any other questions, comments? Oh,
Thanks, Pat. I was just wondering, the discards that were referenced are taking place in which fisheries or which time of year? And is anything being done to reduce those? So it's two questions.
So from some data I've seen, it is primarily the big jumps in the estimate came from the Gulf of Maine and Southern New England large mesh fisheries. Sorry, large mesh trawl, sorry.
and to your second part, does anybody know if any actions are being taken to, does anybody know? No. Okay. David?
I mean, the response makes a little apprehensive. We've got a problem. We're not addressing the problem. If the problem continues, then as Mike Luisi said, we're going to be in this cycle of constantly reducing the targeted fishery and not really addressing the problem. So at some point, I think we should have a discussion, not today, but at a subsequent meeting, perhaps with the councils on what's being done to address it. That's all. Maybe some common sense alternatives that we could use so that we don't close down the directed fishery. Thank you.
Agreed. Chris Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the Dogfish, Mid-Atlantic Council's Dogfish Committee, joint committee with New England, talked about the discard estimate and how to account for that in future years. And it was pointed out that with the quotas for fisheries that are targeted with large mesh trawls are less now than when we got the discard estimates before. So presumably there will be less effort, which could reduce the discards in that manner. But that's an indirect way of maybe predicting what could happen, but it doesn't get to your concern about directly addressing the discard problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any other comments or questions? Seeing none? Nothing? Does anybody have a motion? Mr. Lucy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm happy to make this motion. I think this, as long as those numbers are the same, are those the right numbers, James?
That's what we need to check on.
Okay. It looks different. I don't know why, but is it 4 something? I thought.
Yeah, so that's the same as the federal quota, but if the states choose to roll over, then the state quota would in effect be higher than that. So that is the federal quota right now. But then, so I guess my question is to clarify for me also as we keep track of the landings, do the states who expressed interest in rolling over still want to do that, just to confirm for me?
Emerson?
Thank you. Maybe we could change the wording of that to say the base commercial quota. I don't know if that helps to address the problem. If states decide that they want to roll it over, that's on top of the base commercial quota, isn't it?
Tony?
Just to explain, in the FMP, the rollover is automatic. So we cannot force states to not roll over, but states can voluntarily choose to not roll over. We would just adjust the individual states' quota if they so choose to roll over, and we would bump that up. So it's still the coast-wide quota, but if you want to write base, that's also fine.
So we do not have to include that amount in the motion. Okay. But I see your point. If the maker of the motion wants it changes to the, to the new federal quota or something along those lines. You thinking, Mr. Lucy?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't made the motion yet. I'm just trying to make sure that we get this right. We've got one chance to make it right. In thinking about, so if I had to weigh whether or not, if states roll over the quota, we go over by 500,000 pounds. There's a difference now of 500,000 pounds, and the state would have a higher quota than the federal quota by 500,000 pounds. That's the situation that I think we are all trying not to have happen. So for me in the state of Maryland, if we to maintain the federal quota at the state level to keep us equal and even means that we can't roll over some small amount of spiny dogfish from a previous year, I would be inclined to say for our state that we would not we would opt out of the rollover to get it to be close. But if all the other states decide they're going to do the rollover anyway, then I'm going to jump on board with that too. So I think it's almost like we have to have that conversation first to determine how impactful not rolling over the quota is to the other states before we decide on what that total number is. So maybe we can have that conversation first before I throw myself on this motion.
Nicola?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think that given the current landings in the northern region, which has 58% of the quota, and we're projecting to be very well below that, like I'm not concerned about the disparity that exists from the rollover. When we talked about it in the northern region, rolling over that quota would maybe just allow us to transfer a little bit more to southern states earlier on without worrying about bumping up against our quota if there were some late season landings. So I think based on current quota utilization, the fear of the disparity from rollover doesn't really exist.
Eric?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I agree with Ms. Meserve. It's really about the fisheries performance, and we're underperforming now. So I think the risk is not all that great, to be honest with you.
New Jersey and New York, since you did not state that you were going to roll over, is that still your stand? New York? Thought it was New Jersey and New York. Yeah. And what other states would, other states, I think Virginia was probably going to consider, potentially consider it. Okay. A thumbs up, Marty, does not constitute a yes. So,
Yes.
thank you, Marty. Any other states, Connecticut or any other states, Connecticut?
Well, I think we're in the region with the northern states.
Okay.
Go along with them.
All right. So, yeah, some of the states are definitely considering it, Mike.
No, that's great. I don't, there's no reason to make this a big issue. If we're going to make a motion here, I want to make sure that I'm getting the advice from you, Mr. Chairman, and staff that the number is the number, whatever number needs to be up there to account for the roller. I can't do any math or anything in my head right now. And I've given my staff the last 10 minutes to let me know if I'm going down a really bad path, and that hasn't happened. So
I'm doing the same thing.
I'm inclined to keep things moving forward, but is this the right number that we need to do here for today?
This is the federal quota.
Okay.
New federal quota.
So then I'd move to amend the Spiny Dogfish commercial quota to 10,249,260 pounds for the 2024-2025 fishing year.
And do I have a second to the motion? Let's go with Nicola. Okay. Is there any other discussion on this motion? Any other questions? All right, and this takes a 2/3 vote, correct? All right, so let me read the motion in. Oh, okay. I thought we'd have to we'll do it that way then. Move to amend the Spiny Dogfish commercial quota to 10,249,260 pounds for the 2024-2025 fishing year. Motion by Mr. Luisi, seconded by Ms. Meserve. And this requires a 2/3 vote. Is there anybody in opposition to this motion? Hearing none, the motion is accepted. Okay. Okay. All right, that's it. Is there anything else on the agenda? Anything else anybody wants to bring up? I'm not hearing anything. Do we have a motion? Anything else? Doug? Then, huh? Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.